Brought to you by
EggtownRadioNation.com. You can find me on the internet.
Turn this up.
Yo, hey.
In October of 2006, the FBI put out a very strong warning with significant proof of white supremacist infiltration of law enforcement throughout the United States. This was represented as a serious national threat. It appears the deaths of non-whites at the hands of police is on the rise, and very few analysis of the situation is directly linked back to the FBI's direct warning. Why has this been forgotten? Why is it not being covered? Why is it being ignored? In near prophetic fashion, after the FBI's warning, white nationalist extremism in the U.S. increased exponentially. From 2008 to 2014, the number of white supremacist groups reportedly grew from 149 to nearly 1,000, with no apparent abatement in their infiltration of law enforcement. This year alone, at least 7 San Francisco law enforcement officers were suspended after an investigation revealed they exchanged numerous white power communications laden with remarks about lynching African Americans and burning crosses. 3 reputed Klan members that served as correction officers were arrested for conspiring to murder a black inmate. At least 4 Fort Lauderdale police officers were fired after an investigation found that the officers fantasized about killing black suspects. The report goes on to say that white nationalist domestic terror groups are not publicly tracked despite their link to violent crime and the serious threat they pose. This reality must not be forgotten, and we should raise it as much as we can.
So my first question would be, what political ideology do you embrace at this time?
Well, that's a wide question. But essentially, I'm an African woman who believes in freedom and justice, social justice, political justice, economic justice for all people. I believe in that oppressed people, wherever they are, have the right to self-determination. I believe that socialism is an integral part of building social justice on this planet. I believe that the priorities of this planet have to be completely changed. And instead of profits, instead of policies that destroy the earth, that destroy the water, that destroy human beings, I believe a policy that protects people, that makes people live in a community, a world community. That's what I believe. That's my basic political commitment at this moment.
I want to know, how did you arrive at this spot? Not physically, but what brought you to that conclusion, and what brought you to Cuba?
Well, what brought me to that conclusion was, in the process of struggling, I've also understood that part of struggling is learning, is studying. And my own experiences in the 60s led me to understand that it wasn't just enough to ask for a piece of the pie. That the whole liberation of oppressed people in the United States had to do not with climbing up some ladder to success, not for asking to be just like Rockefeller or just like DuPont or just like Ford, because that would only continue the oppression and exploitation of oppressed people in the United States, and specifically African people born and raised in the United States. So that I began to understand that more and more the condition of my people, my history, was very much connected with other oppressed people, and I began to see that the same foot that was on the necks of the Vietnamese people, that was on the necks of all oppressed people on the planet, was the same foot that was on my neck. And so I began to understand that imperialism has to go. It is a poison that is killing people all over this world. And I became more and more active, and as I became more and more active, the government became more and more repressive. And in the 1960s, the Black Liberation Movement was the #1 target of COINTELPRO. And the Black Panther Party specifically was targeted by J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI, and the CIA, and all of the repressive forces in the United States government. And so I was one of those young people who was targeted by COINTELPRO because I was an activist, because I was opposed to the United States government's policies, because I was opposed to racism. And so I ultimately had to go underground. I was ultimately captured based on being charged with false charges. I was captured. I was shot with my hands in the air. I was shot in the back. I was tortured, beaten. I was spent 2 years in solitary confinement in men's prisons because of my political beliefs. I was spent 6.5 years in prison in the United States, and what I learned about prison in the United States, that it's a new form of plantation, it's a new form of slavery, it's the United States is becoming more and more a police state in which prisons are nothing more than a concentration camp. Concentration camps. It's a euphemism to call what exists now in the United States prisons. They are concentration camps to contain people, to keep them from being productive, to keep them from having a say in their lives. And 1/3 of young black men right now are either in prison or under the so-called jurisdiction of the so-called criminal justice system. So I was one of those people, and lucky enough, I was part of a movement, and my movement helped to liberate me. So in 1979, after being sentenced by an all-white, convicted by an all-white jury, and sentenced to life in prison plus 33 years plus 30 days, I was able to escape in 1979, and in 1984 I was able to come to Cuba, and the Cuban people and the Cuban government welcomed me with open arms.
Everybody remember Malcolm. Nobody remembered he started off red. Everybody remembered Jack George after Blood in My Eye. They didn't remember George before Blood in My Eye. What can we say to the community so they won't continue to abandon their young to a system that is corrupt?
I mean, what saved me from probably being either a puppet, a robot for that system, or being a drug addict, or just being destroyed by that system, was becoming involved, becoming politically involved, and studying. I will always say, and say to anybody, anywhere, anytime, any place, that being in our struggle has done more for me than I can ever do for the struggle of our people, so that I believe that anybody who wants to be sane and healthy on this planet has to understand that you cannot live at the bottom of a garbage can and be happy. In order to be happy, you have to start to remove the garbage. And that means becoming active, that means becoming conscious, that means becoming aware, and that means studying and struggling and loving and becoming people. People who love people instead of being people who are alienated from other people, who are being used by the government. We have to learn a new way of living. We have to build communities, build a sense of community, build a sense of freedom, our own space where we can sit in peace and love. And I think all of that is a process. If you don't grow, then you're going backwards. So I think that you start out bit by bit, and little by little you work from wherever you are to do your bit to the liberation of oppressed people and to making this world somewhere that is livable.
We've heard a lot, and I've heard a lot from you in general when I was in the United States, of your clear support of the political prisoners, The questions that I haven't heard so clearly from other people is what about that million? You know, can you delineate between the political prisoners, which they say there's 100 political prisoners and prisoners of war, them from the 1.5 million prisoners that they currently hold?
Both political prisoners and people who are victims of the political system are products of that repressive capitalist system. The difference between political prisoners and those who are victims of the politics of the United States government, the racist, at this point, almost fascist politics of the United States government, is that political prisoners are conscious. Political prisoners are conscious of the reasons for that oppression and are clearly struggling against the system. Mumia Abu-Jamal is on death row, not just because he's an African man, but because he is an African man that is capable of politicizing all of the people in the United States about the realities of the United States. He's capable of pulling the sheep's clothing off of the wolf and exposing the United States government as the vicious, hungry, greedy wolf that it is. And so I believe that it is most important for anybody who believes in justice, who believes that human beings have the right to be free, to struggle to free Mumia Abu-Jamal, to struggle to free all political prisoners and prisoners of war, and to struggle for a new political, economic reality in the United States where people have the right to live, have the right to be free, have the right to be free from repression, from being stopped and searched and thrown on the ground at will. I believe that it is important to free political prisoners so that we can all struggle to free ourselves. I was in prison 6.5 years, and support made all the difference in the world, and I think that as communities, we have to understand that our position cannot be the same as the U.S. government's position. What they're saying is that these people are in prison, forget them, throw them out. They're worthless, low-life human beings. We're saying that these are human beings that have been victimized. They might have problems, they might be unconscious, and it is our job as a community to reach out to them, to say we understand that you are a human being, we give you support, we give you love, we give you what we have, the knowledge that we have to share. I think that our communities have to be more and more involved in helping, embracing, educating, and providing support for those sisters and brothers who are in prison, and preparing conditions so that they can come out and be useful not only to our communities, but useful to our struggle for liberation. And I think that it's important for those sisters and brothers who are in prison to remember we are human beings. Do never let them dehumanize you. You in prison, you can be a father, you can be a mother, you can work to educate your children. In prison, you can work to educate yourself. Do not let anybody try to turn you into an animal. That those on the inside must understand that they are in there to grow. The United States government or the prisons cannot rehabilitate anybody, cannot educate anybody. They are criminals. How is a criminal going to rehabilitate somebody? So I think that we have got to educate ourselves and prepare ourselves to fight a repressive system, an oppressive system, and a system that smashes the human being to the point where people don't even remember how to take a walk, how to say good morning, how to smile at each other. We have to take this planet back from the beast that are controlling it right now. I escaped from prison in 1979, and since 1979, the population of women in prison has tripled. Tripled. It boggles my mind, and it should boggle everybody's mind who understands mathematics. More and more poor women, because there are no rich women, no rich people in prison. So you're dealing with poor women, you're dealing with poor mothers, you're dealing with African, Asian, Latin American, and indigenous women who are in those prisons are being dehumanized, just snatched up off the street, given all kinds of time. And I think that it is important for women to be activists in dealing with women in prison and freeing women in prison and freeing women who are political prisoners, because there are quite a few women who are political prisoners. And I also think that the women's movement needs to deal with those women and to have outreach programs, support programs for those women who are in prison, to help them be united with their children, with their families. Because what is happening is there are a whole lot of children out there that have no mother, no father, that are being just thrown out into the street. So I say that if you call yourself a woman that identifies with the liberation of women, then identify with the most oppressed, exploited women in the United States. I mean, because I'll be real with you. You know, one of the most, just raging pains that I had was being separated from my child, was being forbidden to hold her, to touch her, to breastfeed her. The condition of women in prison in the United States is unbearable. I mean, I have seen women who have given birth and they have not been able to even see their children. Social workers can tell women if their children can visit them or not. I was in prisons where it was forbidden for children to visit. The Middlesex County workhouse where I was, it was pathetic. It tore your insides out. You see all these little children outside trying to scream and yell at their mothers. They couldn't see their mothers. It was the most frustrating thing, the most heartbreaking thing that I've ever seen. So I think that anybody who has any human sensibility, who has any commitment to women, needs to get involved in liberating women in prison, in providing support, education, job training, etc. for those sisters who are in prison. There's an effort to destroy our communities, to completely knock out any sense of community that we have. And so drugs, crack cocaine is being pumped up into our communities, and we do not have airplanes, yachts to bring that stuff in. It is being brought into our communities, and people are getting rich from it. And the same people that are getting rich, exploiting people all over the world, are getting rich, bringing cocaine, bringing drugs into the United States. And I think, and selling a kind of mentality that tells people you cannot function on this planet. So the only option you have is to go somewhere and drug out, get high, spend your whole life in a cloud, a death cloud. So I think that we have to more and more understand that it's not the number of women in prison is not an isolated phenomena. It is a part and parcel of a policy to tell people we don't care if you have health care, we don't care if you have education, we don't care if you have access to social services, we don't care if you have any safety net. All we care about is, will you buy our sneakers? Will you buy our dope? will you buy our junk? Will you buy our chains, gold chains, silver chains, human chains, whatever kind of chains, they want to put it on you. And so I say that we have got to get rid of that consumer mentality. We have got to get rid of that mentality of being high and wanting to be high. And we've got to stop letting people put it in our communities. I look in magazines, I don't care what magazine it is, if it's for people of color, they got cigarette ads in there, they got billboards with Joe Camel and every other body, you know, trying to get us to get the mentality where we want to be hooked on something, where we can't live without something, and something that is detrimental to our health. So what we need to do is get rid of the million liquor stores in our community, get rid of the liquor ads, the cigarette ads.
Do you hear the call on the international community against the United States use of slave labor? Because I'm not hearing it inside the country.
Well, I mean, it's very hard to get the message out all over the world because the United States controls the media. And so we have to really work to let people know that in the United States, prisons are being turned into plantations. It's a new kind of plantation with a new kind of slave labor, but in my book, slave labor is slave labor. And so I think that we have to work to get that information out to people all over the world, because even though a lot of people understand that the United States government is an imperialist country, they do not understand how repressive, how racist, and how reactionary the United States is inside of the United States.
Within the United States, I feel like the left has somehow not developed a consistent theory surrounding the incarceration of human beings. I mean, they would save whales, they will jump over, save a tree, but when it comes to saving my ass, it's a whole different question.
You know, when you say the left, I think if you don't deal with the issue of prisons today, you're being left out of the left. Essentially, that's just like being in Nazi Germany and not dealing with the fact that there are all these people in concentration camps. There are concentration camps in the United States right now, and I believe that it is immoral. I don't care who you are, what your political beliefs are, whether you consider yourself left, whether you consider yourself progressive, whether you consider yourself part of the liberation movement of oppressed people, whatever your political beliefs are, if they are humanist political beliefs, then you have to deal with the question of people in prison, and you have to deal with the question of crime. You have to deal with the question of justice. But if we do not do it, then the right wing just runs with it and calls for law and order, and law and order to them means just locking people up. It doesn't mean eliminating the conditions that cause people to be in prison. It means eliminating the people. I think that, you know, young people need to find ways they can get together. I think they need to understand that they need to struggle right where they are. Deal with the issues that are stabbing them in the side, in the back, in the head, and deal from there. And then build a movement, whether it's at your job, whether it's on your block, whether it's in the prison you are, whether it's in wherever you find yourself at. You start dealing with getting the foot off of your neck. And I think that young people, whether you're in college or whether you're in prison, you need to do what you need to do to make the next century belong to the people, because this century has been 100 years more of slavery.
Conditions ain't right for you to return home, and we miss you. What can those sisters do? to support you?
Well, I think that my liberation from exile, because I have been liberated from the belly of the beast, has very much to do with the need for us as a people to call for amnesty, immediate amnesty for all political prisoners and prisoners of war. Because what happened? The FBI admitted that it had a COINTEL program to neutralize activists. And they neutralize them in all kinds of ways: assassination, false imprisonment, false charges, etc. But they never admitted to who were the victims. Geronimo spent 27 years in prison before they ever admitted.
You still haven't admitted it.
That's right. But there was enough evidence, and the evidence has been out there for years before he got out of prison. Dhoruba bin Wahad spent 19 years in prison. Those prisoners have been in there a million times longer than they should have. And that's not 1 minute. So I say that there has to be a movement for amnesty of the victims of COINTELPRO, and that those who are victimized, spied on, harassed, etc., need to be completely set free, exonerated, apologized to, and brought back to their communities. I think that that movement is important, and it's important right now, because the government's so-called Freedom of Information Act was a sham.
There's nothing free about it.
No, not at all. I'm telling you that I got a box, and that was one of my files, and there was 33, a great big box like this, with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of papers, and 99% of it crossed out. How you gonna call that freedom of information? You know? So I think that we need to be serious about building a movement for amnesty right now for those political prisoners and prisoners of war. And I don't think yesterday it is too soon. I just want to say, sisters, I love you. I'm so proud. Go out and multiply yourselves. Go out and get another sister. Go out and talk to anybody and everybody that you can, to raise people's consciousness and to build a huge movement, not only to free political prisoners, but to free all of our people from the prison that is the United States of America.